I am so excited to have one of my favorite people, Dr. Karen Lindsey, on the podcast today. Dr. Lindsey, who she prefers her students to call her Dr. K. So for the purpose of this, I will call you Dr. K, even though I was never technically a student. She is assistant professor of strategic communication at Elon University in North Carolina. She also has her own consulting business where she primarily advises university presidents and corporate leaders on personal brand and reputation management, crisis communication, media relations, and all the things that keep us on our toes all the time as business leaders. I have her on the podcast today because I feel like after the conversations that I've had with so many different business leaders, the one challenge that we all share is communicating, whether it's internally, whether it's externally. So thank you for being here today. I'm ready to dig in and talk about how we can be better leaders by means of better communication.
Absolutely. So let's do
thank you so much. Yes. So can we talk first? We're just going to jump right in about how, in your experience, internal or external communication challenges for a business owner, what those might look like during different phases of growth. And I'll kind of, what I like to do usually when I speak to a business leader is talk through what I call a know, grow, and scale phase. Mm-hmm. Know being that branding, messaging, very foundational elements of your business. Then grow being you get your website and you start your social media, you start doing different communications. And scale is when you're scaling to a point where your business is kind of rolling without you. But in none of those areas, I'm talking about internal communication. Right. So through different phases of the life of a business, and I know you've worked with business leaders and universities, so you can speak to both because I feel like the challenges might be the same. What do you see, or what could a business owner expect? And I know that's a loaded question. So
yeah. So again, I go to the point that you just made about you often speak to external communication factors. You can only be successful externally if you have your act together internally. I often say, and we'll talk about this later, I believe, but I often say your employees are your best brand ambassadors. And so whatever you're saying and doing internally is directly affecting your brand, your ROI, whatever you're doing internally. It's in this parallel, if not intertwined track with what you're doing externally. So one of the things I talk to a lot of leaders about, even when I talk occasionally to entrepreneurs, and even university presidents who are kind of coming in and taking on a new role as a leader in what feels like an entrepreneurial environment.
Right.
Yep. So what I tell leaders, and this is based on some work that a gentleman by the name of Peter Flint has done, and it's this idea of going from founder to CEO. So if you've started the business, you founded it, and you know how to be a good founder, right? You know all the things to do to get that brand out there in front of people. And now all of a sudden you're in this role and you have people inside your organization that are looking to you for answers.
Yeah.
And so what I say is that there's kind of mental models that have to change when you're thinking about external versus internal brand. And the first one, as a founder, you're thinking more organically, you're thinking more about wearing many hats and getting this business off the ground. As more of a CEO model or getting into the model of being a more established business, you're now thinking about stakeholders, you're thinking about KPIs, you're thinking about all these things that now become a little less internal, but just as important. And so when I tell students, not just students, but leaders and anybody interested in internal communication, is that you have to know yourself and you have to know where you are as an organization. And how do you do that? Typically, I say, startup phase, mid phase, and then kind of that mature phase. It's more phases than that, but really those three. And so startup, of course, you're doing a lot of things externally. That mid phase is where you need to start knowing who you are, what your brand is externally, your brand persona, all of those things. And then think about how do you reflect that internally. And so I tell leaders always know yourself, it sounds so simple, but we don't think about it because as leaders, we're often saying, I have to lead and be the person out there all the time. And particularly as somebody starting a business. So what I say first is know yourself and know where you are in these phases. And the biggest challenge with that is then know who you want to be and who you want your organization to be. And to me, the best way of knowing that and thinking about that is by being your authentic self. And
Yeah.
that sometimes is hard for people to do as a leader. And so I just say you have to look at the organization. Yes, externally, again, that's why we have people like you to help kind of
Right.
handle that.
Right.
Kind of why we have people like you
Oh,
too.
touch the internal. Yeah.
I also tell people is that, there's resources, how you say there's an app for that. There's an app for everything. There's a resource
Mhm.
for everything. And there are other people like me who do internal advising
Right.
to startup companies and executives. And what I say is the best person to advise you is not necessarily someone who knows your business, but knows communication and internal communication from the standpoint of knowing yourself, from the standpoint of do I have a communication plan,
Yep.
internal and external. You need
Yep.
both.
Yep.
And so that would be kind of, I don't know if I answered your question, but
You
that
did. Well, and
so
I have a couple questions that have come just since you've been talking to us a little off script, but you know, just I feel like because the external component in communication is, for lack of a better word, the sexier, part.
that's
We don't want to look at internal because I mean the same reason we don't we don't necessarily want to go to therapy and find out that we're the problem, like
right.
so let's kind of dig into that because, and you just said founder and CEO. I have never thought about this. On the bottom of my email signature, I have founder and CEO, but founder and CEO really require two completely different skill sets.
Absolutely. And to
And
me, that's the continuum. If you are really thinking about business growth, when you're
yeah,
founding something, you're really starting it, of course, and you're laying the ideas and getting the business, trying to generate the revenue, all of those things. But as a CEO, now you're more in oh, I've got to look at processes, I've got to look at systems. And you always are looking at those things, but you can step back a little bit because what happens at CEO level is exactly what we also talk about is now you're onboarding people. You have other people coming into the organization. That changes your role tremendously from
right.
founder. Even though we know you started the company, now if you're kind of this CEO type, now you're looking at, oh, wow, now I've got all of these people that I now have to quote unquote lead and have to really set the vision, which is all of those internal things that I think we're not thinking about when we're a founder.
Right. And
We're
I think this might be a good place to stop and say if you are listening and you're a founder and CEO, have grace for yourself in understanding that you might need help doing the CEO part.
That's great.
Whether it's a consultant or whether it's, maybe you stay as founder and do something else if you're more operationally minded and
That's
have somebody else lead the company. That
absolutely.
doesn't mean you're any less than,
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great thought.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about culture, corporate culture,
Mm,
because I think every CEO likes to think that they have a good company culture. And I've been a part of organizations that think they have a great company culture, but don't ever talk about company culture, but it's actually pretty great. So there's kind of a lot in between. So what do you feel like are things that maybe just like an awareness check for any leaders or CEOs out there? What are some things that can cause culture shifts internally that we need to kind of look for,
mm,
be on the lookout for, be aware of? Because I think and I think we'll speak to this in a minute too, but I think we all have blind spots. I know we all have blind spots.
absolutely.
And so,
Absolutely.
are there some culture shifts that you see that are common throughout universities or throughout different
Yeah.
organizations? Help.
Whether it's a large university or a big corporation, I do some consulting with financial services
Yeah,
executives as well. And what I see is the biggest shift in culture has to do with growth.
yeah,
Whenever you're growing,
yeah,
whether it's in revenue, in number of employees, that always shifts the way you behave internally, externally, the way what you say about yourself. It starts to change whether you know it or not. And
yeah,
so what I always say is growth is kind of the sneaky culture shifter.
yeah,
And so basically what you need to keep an eye on is, if a year ago we were at 2 employees and this year we're at 5, Doesn't seem like a lot, but now you've got different personalities, different expectations, different roles and responsibilities. And so, as a CEO, as a leader of any organization, you need to keep your eye on growth, and particularly growth as it relates to number of employees and even financials, because I think we behave differently when we get into a different level of business success. And
Yeah.
so I think that that can impact culture. I also say that culture is also it's different for everyone, even though you may say we have a great culture. How I'm defining that could be the fact that I go out and have lunch with people every day. Someone else could say the CEO or founder speaks to me on a regular basis. That's important to me.
Right. That's
Culture.
good.
So culture is all about what is it that would be universal values in your organization, and then how do they show up in your organization? How are they embodied at every level, from the founder, CEO, to the person who might be your administrative assistant? How do those things show up? And they'll look different because of the role, but they
Right.
should be consistent. And so I say culture shifts are caused a lot by growth and a lack of recognition of
Mhm.
how to embody who you really are, and those values that hopefully, because you started the organization with a mission, vision, and value statement,
Right. Yeah. Yep. Yep.
that you're now revisiting that as you grow. And so
Yeah.
that would be my thought.
And I have had conversations with people, not to derail us again, but I've had conversations with people who either didn't have their own mission, vision, values, or didn't feel like that was important work on the front end. But I see that as like guiding principles, just like in my family. And I've had another podcast recently where I've talked about this, but in my family, we have
I,
those roles that are our core values as a family. You know, my 5-year-old knows what he says and what he's not allowed to say. And if another kid says something that he's not allowed to say, he'll tell the other kid, "I'm not allowed to say that in my house." You know, so that's a value that he quickly can recognize and then know that he's going to pivot from that conversation. So, I mean, I don't really know what I'm asking of you other than can you just, reiterate or, help, is that the very first thing you do as an organization
I
is establish that?
from
Do
an
you get
internal
involved? How do you do that?
internal communication standpoint, I advise all leaders, whether you're a very established business or a startup, you need to set that tone, because again, at any point, it becomes that touchstone that you can go back to as your organization grows. And you might say, well, it's just words, it's fluff. Well, don't make it just words and
If
fluff.
that's the case, then you did it wrong.
Right. And you're not the one doing it. And so what I say, it's not just words and it's not fluff, because now you embody that and your team embodies that. Your employees, your everybody in the organization embodies it. So it doesn't become just words on a page, and that you're really living it out. And some days you do it better than others, absolutely. But
As
you
with
need to have it. I'm a big fan of writing down things that I think even any business owner has probably recognized. When you write down you have a business plan, you have it. That's why we create those things. You might have goals, revenue goals or sales goals. That's why you have those. This is no different than that. It's just as important part of your business plan as sales goals might be.
right. That's so good. So let's talk about blind spots because we all have them. And, my hope is that every CEO has somebody in their business that can call them out. I have that person that I hope would do that every time. Um, what are some common blind spots that entrepreneurs or C-level executives might have that from an internal communication standpoint that might negatively impact their teams?
Yeah, I'd say the first one, which is really tough to admit, but it happens, and that is this idea of what I call organic trust, that you think you can trust everybody,
Oh, yeah.
but you can't. And so, not to make you this suspicious, paranoid leader,
Yeah.
but be wise with
Yeah.
who believes in your vision, who believes in your organization as much as you do, and what you might reveal to them, and how you reveal that to them. So there's this idea of, well, everybody's kind of just trusting. We all believe we're all here because we believe in this business. We all believe in this opportunity. And so that's kind of what I call organic trust. And that can sometimes be a blind spot, that you're
Mm.
kind of sharing and believing that everybody believes the same as you. The second one I would say is conflict avoidance. And that is where internally we see it, we know it, whether you're new or an established business. And we don't want to say anything about it. And, the funniest thing, when I used to live in the South, I used to laugh about the fake politeness.
You're not from the South, so you're like, what is this?
I'm like, why are these people not talking about what is really going on? And so
Yeah,
I always say, and not everybody does that, but my experience has been in certain parts of the country, people are more willing to speak up and say
yeah,
things and address things. And so I think as a leader, you have to embody this idea that um, if there's a problem, I need to address it early, because when we let something go on for too long, it's killing our business, it's killing our spirit, it's killing the energy of others. Right.
yeah,
And so everything about that internally is important to address conflict early. And that's an internal communication issue. And we could do a whole nother podcast on how
right.
to have what
On
we
that,
call courageous conversations. And that's what
right.
you have to do as a leader. And then the last and the third thing that I think from an internal perspective that leaders and business owners fail to do, and that is kind of a blind spot, and that's crisis communication. You need to know internally if something happens in our business. I don't care if it's some operational thing that goes wrong, some person on your team behaving badly that made the news. You
Yep,
need an internal plan of who gets called when, how, what do we say if some
yep,
media comes on the scene. And it's kind of that's that blend between external communication and internal. But I
yep,
think it has taken so many businesses down from
yep,
not thinking about what if scenarios, if
yeah,
something is a crisis for our business. And you can almost scenario plan maybe 2 or 3 things
right,
that could likely happen in your business. And it can be anything, but at the end of the day, you need to know who your go-to people are, who might be your spokespeople if media come knocking, that
right.
sort of thing. And so I would say those would be the 3 things that I see the kind of blind spots: that organic trust, that conflict avoidance, and then this idea of lack of a crisis communication plan, that people think, well, it's always going to be good like this forever. And I hope it is, but
Right.
just in case.
When I think you even when if you're in startup mode and you just have, like a team of less than 5, you think, oh, what could go wrong? But it only takes one.
That's right. I
you know,
always say where there are people, something can go wrong.
Something can go wrong.
And
That's
it can
right.
go
Well,
right too, but I
and
always like to plan.
especially in the world of social media, I think that
That's
just
right.
takes it up a notch. So,
That's absolutely it.
that's
Hmm.
so challenging. Well, what are some okay, so what are the healthy let's talk about, now that we know what our blind spots are, what are some healthy ways that we can or healthy practices that we can adopt as business leaders? And, you know, also, I guess, tag onto that, what can we do on a regular basis
Yeah.
for our teams to, what kind of I'm a Enneagram 3 checklist kind of gal.
Well,
So are there some things that I can implement in my regular week that can help me communicate better?
so, and not just again in your week, it goes back to the things that we think, I despise the word soft skills because those are really the hard skills. Those are
Right.
really the skills that we mess up on as leaders, as communicators, the soft skills. And so what I tell people is it goes back to knowing yourself. And so
Mhm.
just like you said about the Enneagram, like take some of those kinds of self assessment, self awareness tests. Know yourself first. Okay. And that's a healthy thing to do, to say, when I respond to a crisis, this is how I typically do it. Or just like you said, I like checklists. I'm an 8. And so I'm like, I want people to be talking to me and big,
Yeah. Yeah.
engaged. And so it's knowing yourself, I think is a healthy thing to do. I'm probably, I love taking those kind of personality assessments, not
Mhm.
because they're the gospel, but because they can reveal some things. There's science behind it. There are
Mhm.
things that they can reveal to us that are consistent with who we are as people and who we are as leaders. So I think that's a healthy thing to do, is kind of that self assessment and self awareness. And then the second thing, which sounds so obvious, whether it's formalized or informal, check in with any team members, even your own peers, in the organization. Maybe you have two other leaders alongside you in a small organization, checking in with them in terms of these questions about what have we done this week, this month, this year that made us proud? Like,
Mm.
ask that question, and it can generate a lot of interesting conversation and around the business. Like, what did we do this month, this year, this week that we were really proud of?
Mm.
That's a
Mm.
point of pride. It's a point of happiness if it's something that everybody can point to. And you might be surprised to find when you ask that question what different people are proud of, right? Not everybody's going to say, well, when we made that big sale, that was it for me.
Yeah.
Somebody else, it might be, well, when we helped that one small operation get their systems up, then that was it for me.
Yeah.
And so again, what is it that we're proud of? I think is so important. And then again, I think this idea of asking, what do I need to do to be a better leader? And that when I say you ask to people that are kind of your advisors, people that help you grow, that kind of self awareness piece. And then the last one that I think is important in looking internally at your team is you might ask, who's missing from our team?
Mm.
Whether it's a skill set, a person, who's missing from our team that might make us even better? And so those would be some of the questions that I typically tell small business owners, entrepreneurs, university presidents, corporate leaders. That's what you need to be asking yourself on a regular basis. And again, having those regular strategic planning meetings and conversations, don't discount those. I know you're busy doing the important parts of the business, but just like every other important part of the business, your internal check-ins, your internal systems and processes and communication is
Yeah.
just as important as what you do externally.
Yeah. That's so good. I feel like, I'm more because I like the checklist.
Mhm.
I'm learning about myself. And as I read more about Enneagram 3, it's amazing. So, I'm learning that I can sacrifice relationship over getting things done. And so I make myself, I try to make myself slow down a little bit and ask, because the strategic meetings, those give me life. We can come away with that, with the checklist and
The checklist.
goals, but it's the every week at minimum asking, we just started this with our team. What was your high and what was your low?
That's right.
Honestly, I actually realized someone on my team, her low was something that I had given her to do without much instruction. She didn't say it that way. She was
Right.
very sweet and
Right.
just said,
Right.
"My low was working on this particular client." Da, da, da. And I realized, oh, the reason that was her low is because I probably didn't give her enough instruction.
But what
And
valuable information you're getting as a leader. And that's why I'm saying sometimes that conflict avoidance and fear of having these courageous conversations or asking people. What I tell people is definitely if you ask it, be prepared to have a tough skin and be prepared to do something about it.
right, right,
Don't just ask, because I've worked with so many companies where I've done
yeah.
focus groups and I've done all this, produced all this great data of what people want, and then it goes into a
And
file.
nobody's willing to change.
Right.
It's like that I will say, and I will also add that can greatly affect culture, like we were just talking
Absolutely.
about. If the team, fills out a survey, for example,
That's right.
knowing well that leadership's not going to do anything
That's
about
right.
it,
And
or
that's, yeah, and that's that idea of if you ask the question, again, be prepared to do something about it. Now that
yeah,
doesn't mean you have to fix it overnight. If
right,
it's something big enough and it takes time, but be prepared to say if this is perception or this is real to them, then it's a real concern for our business and for our growth and for our
right,
success. And so I think that is, it's tough to do, but
yeah,
it's so important to do as a leader and as you're growing and as you're looking at again this kind of parallel track of internal and external communication, because your employees and what people who work in your organization say about you, they are the biggest influencers on your brand than anybody else, than
yeah.
the customer, than anyone. I think
And
employees are.
I think you could be very tempted to take feedback and dismiss something because, oh, well, they're X, Y, or Z anyway. So, this is how they think anyway, or, make assumptions about,
Absolutely.
about what they say based on what you think about them.
That's
And,
right.
how they feel is how they feel. So,
Right. And again, the old adage, perception is reality. So if they
right.
are perceiving that from you or behavior or something in the organization, it's real to them, whether it is or not. In their
Right.
minds, it's real. And so,
Real.
again, as a leader, you're called to a higher standard. You're called to a higher way of thinking. Not that it's easy; it isn't. But to keep the organization healthy and to keep yourself healthy, you
Yeah.
have to really be self-aware and willing to listen. And that's why, like I said, I do like these self-assessment kind
Hmm.
of checklists or whatever they are, but things that you can do to say, who am I? What are my personality types? Because every personality type also has a dark side, just what you said. As a
Right.
checklist person, I would love to have you on my team because I'm not. And so I would love that. But the dark side of that is then you'd always be asking for checklists. And I'm like, I don't
Right.
have it to give.
I
But
have
if
it. Right.
you know that I'm the more strategic, visionary, kind of all over idea person,
I'll have
then
your checklist for you.
and then we're going to know how to operate and communicate better
Right.
with each other. And so I
Right.
think that's part of it is not only not knowing yourself, but not knowing your team. Because
Right.
then, even if you don't agree with somebody, like you said, you can't discount that they feel that way because that's a personality, a behavior type. And so, what I would say, if you're a company and you're growing, invest in doing some of these personality assessments and have somebody come in and help you facilitate and talk it through. It's so easy to
I
do.
love it. Well, I was going to ask too. Have you come across the path assessment yet? And this is maybe a shameless plug. I don't know. I have a good friend who's the CEO of the company,
I'm
but
trying to think what.
I am very intrigued. It's a Birmingham based company called Good Job.
Okay,
Path assessment is for it's for employees looking, but also it's basically a database for employees searching. You can tell accomplishments from a resume, but you can't tell personality types from a
that's right.
resume. And if you know you're looking for somebody who is ambitious and an achiever to fill a certain role, this is a good. I would just encourage you if you haven't looked at it yet. It's called the
Great.
Path Assessment. I think it's just
Cool.
pathassessment.com. But it's a very interesting. It kind of shows you similar to the Enneagram, like what's your strongest, and then what's kind of your two and your second,
Mhm.
third most likely. But I found it very interesting. I'm going to have my team take it this week. So
Excellent. Yeah,
yeah,
I'm a big fan of also the strengths based approach. I've done a lot with Strengths Quest and strengths
yes,
based leadership, and that is the science behind that and the personality categories. I've been very impressed with the
good.
realness of it. But what I also tell people is not to use these assessments as I'm a that and that's all I can do.
Right,
Okay,
right.
so
I've
just
done that with the Enneagram. I'm like, well, I don't do that. So.
I tell people that it's kind of like, not that I'm into it, but I hear people saying things like that when they talk about horoscopes. Oh, that's a Leo. That's a
Oh,
Leo. That's a Scorpio. And
as
I'm
if it
like,
excludes you from being able to.
right. It's like, I would expect that because that's their sign or whatever. And so what I tell people is never use an assessment tool or some labeling tool to say that you can't do something else, but say it allows me to understand my team, it allows me to understand myself, and it allows me to understand why we might be missing some communication cues internally. And so
Yes,
that's how I use it
how to
internally.
repair anything that maybe any damage that's been done.
Exactly.
This is so great. Well, okay, so I'll just wrap up by asking. So, I focus on overall brand health in my business, but I know, as we talked about at the very beginning, that internal communication directly ties to overall brand health. So, what are some ways, or how are some ways that we can, strengthen our brand? How do those two, internal communication and external communication, merge to create a healthy brand?
Hmm. So again, it goes back to this idea that employees are your best brand ambassadors.
Yeah.
And so when you're tending to your internal communication, they are going to have better things to say about your organization and about you, even. And that can draw either customers to you, that can draw new employees, the kind of employees that you might want to attract. And
Right.
so, one of the things that I think is so important is really thinking about being as proactive with internal communication instead of just reactive. Okay, now there's a problem or we've grown and people say they don't know what's going on in the organization. What are some things that you might put in place now, even if you have a social media presence, all of that? What are some things that you can put in place? Maybe you have a day where an employee takes over the page or whatever and talks
Right.
about
Oh, I love
a
that.
day a day in the life of or whatever of this company. And so doing things that also helps the employees or people internally celebrate who you are. And again, going back to this idea, when you know your vision, values, you can have kind of this brand persona embodied through these individuals. And so I'm always about the persona that you say you want your customers to know. It needs to live inside of the organization first. And you do that by drawing the employees in, by communicating on a regular basis. And whether it is, face to face is my love, and it's proven to be the best, but sometimes you're too busy. So if there's something that you can, record, even if it's just thanking people for their hard work, like do that on a regular basis. We forget because we get so busy. And I even say, as a professor teaching strategic communication, sometimes I'm so focused on teaching it that I don't do it. And so I'm very aware of that when I consult and advise people. And so I would just encourage leaders to really say that the external brand and the internal brand and persona can't live separately. They are intertwined. They have to live together. They have to be embodied through the people in your organization. And that all goes back to step one, the fluffy soft skill stuff of knowing yourself and knowing how you might communicate messages about who you are as an organization, the health of the organization, and again, where you see the organization going. Those are the three things that people always want to know. And that those are three things that can make or break a brand and an organization or company. So that's where
I have learned, I just needed you to preach to me. That's so good. It's, I'm less than a year in, and these are things that, I've already, not done. And I need to make sure that I'm prioritized because I'm such a doer that I leave out some of the necessary things that are going to come back to bite me, I think, if I don't go ahead and put some things in place. So that's wonderful.
And that's the key, is putting those systems and those things in place before you need them.
Right. That's so good. So I enjoy following you on social media because we share an affinity for coffee. Yes. So if anyone else is a coffee lover or just wants to follow around because you're so great with social media, where would they find you? How could they find you on social?
So you can find me on both Twitter and Instagram at Dr. K Lindsey. So DrKLinzy, because I'm so clever. So that's where you can find me. But I love posting photos. This is how exciting my Instagram is. Posting photos of my latest coffee mug. I call them meaningful mugs because they all have a story.
Well,
and
they
so
do.
That's why I post them.
I think it's very entertaining. And in fact, every time I think about you when I come home with a new mug, because I just love a coffee mug. And I'll buy them knowing good and well, we have a 3 deep shelf, they're all stacked. And my husband's like, well, that's and when we moved a couple of years ago, we cleaned out and we're right back to where we were to begin with.
It's so funny. I moved from Dallas here to North Carolina. And I had boxes and I was like, well, that one doesn't hold that much meaning, so I'll get rid of that. So I had 2 big boxes of coffee mugs. And then when I came here, I had still 3 shelves stacked. And I thought I cleaned this out. I was unpacking and it kept going through boxes. And I thought I cleaned this out. But, I think that it's something as simple as that too. And to go back to leaders, we need to have our little picadillos, our little things that we do. And that's okay.
If you weren't filling them with coffee, it'd be a different thing. You're using them. So
I actually do use them. That's funny. That's great.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. It was a blessing to see you and catch up with you. And I know this will be a blessing to others. In fact, after I post these, I get almost instant feedback. So I'll be sure to share that with you. I know that people will love it.
Please do. It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much. So good to see you. I'm so proud of you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.